Ladies and gentlemen, the Wall Street Journal has backed President Trump, or at least, perhaps not the entire boycott, but at least President Trump's vantage point that CEOs should stay out of politics. So you have Coca-Cola CEOs, Major League Baseball, Delta. It's none of their business. Like, if a court of law has deemed or decided or ruled that Georgia's voting laws were unconstitutional and unfairly targeted a specific group of people, then that's a different story. If a court of law has stated, okay, this is not right, then I can understand a CEO saying, okay, well, we're going to take a moral stand. But they haven't even read number one, these CEOs haven't even read the legislation. There are ways that it expands voting. Even the Washington Post acknowledged this. Number two, minority voters, non-white voters in Georgia and around the country voted more for President Trump, according to the exit polls. According to the numbers, he got a greater percentage of the non-white vote in Georgia than he did in 2016. I explained this in my last segment, or yesterday, or the other day. President Trump got a greater percentage of the non-white vote. So the argument that Georgia Republicans are trying to silence specific groups doesn't make any sense. He did better among non-white voters. He did worse by about 6 or 7 points or so. He did worse among voters that look like Brian Kemp and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. So President Trump, number one, the Republicans in Georgia, first of all, they were championed and defended by Democrats because Trump went after them. Then they, God forbid, decided to pass legislation that addresses pandemic reforms. These reforms address pandemic-related protocols that were implemented because science, for safety purposes. And so that's why, you have restrictions. The DNC primaries, you can look at what Democrats do to their own voters. Okay, you had like over 100,000 people taken off voting rolls in New York when Bernie Sanders was running in 2016. You can see what Democrats do. You could just look here, Bernie Sanders, New York. I think it was in Brooklyn. You could see what they do. It's pretty unbelievable. Sorry, New York purged 200,000 voters in 2016. It wasn't a mistake. So there you go. This is city and state New York. This is unbelievable. So New York purge. Here's how so many New Yorkers were blocked from voting and why it could happen again. 200,000 voters. Okay, and it goes on to say, yeah, Democrats just simply didn't want them to vote for Bernie Sanders. Essentially, that's what it was all about. 200,000 voters were blocked in New York. Okay, hit subscribe to this channel right now because I'm going to give you context and perspective from somebody who used to be the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post, and the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. Okay, if you want to read my writing in the Hill, the Huffington Post, Salon, the Jerusalem Post, the Federalist, the Daily Caller, the Roanoke Times, the Times of Israel, you can go to hagoodman.com and see. You can see my debates there as well if you want to support my voice long term. Thank you to my new Patreons. My Patreon is below. It's also on hagoodman.com. But hit subscribe. President Trump is essentially leading a boycott of around 74 million Americans. Now, this is not an example of cancel culture. This is simply playing the game that was created by Democrats. What Democrats did is they said, and media and activists, they said, look, we don't really have, because this is what, like, they cancel out people for quotes or things that they wrote 10 years ago on Twitter. Okay, there are editors, Vogue editors now being forced out. There was a reporter in Iowa an intrepid reporter who found out that this very altruistic young man who raised $1 million for a beer company, through a beer company for a children's charity 10 years ago, wrote something offensive. That beer company, because these CEOs are run, but their marketing departments are like, it must be run by like the most petrified, frightened individuals that just adhere to whatever the latest social media fad is. And so the beer company distanced itself from the altruistic young man who raised $1 million or $2 million for $1 million, something like that, for a children's charity. And the intrepid reporter who found the offensive tweets 10 years ago that forced the beer company to distance itself from an altruistic young man, that intrepid reporter was then let go from the same publication for his offensive tweets. So very rarely, though, like, you'll see that where they'll eat their own. Usually it's, okay, this person had offensive tweets, but they've apologized. This person had a $20 million venture capital people, a pundit on MSNBC. If you're a liberal pundit, if you're a liberal journalist, if you're on the left, you can ask for forgiveness and empathy. Very likely you'll get it. You don't always get canceled out. In fact, the odds are that you won't get canceled out, depending on how important you are. So an MSNBC journalist or the $20 million venture capital people who are now facing a racial discrimination lawsuit. So you see, like, CNN had a racial discrimination lawsuit. They're a bunch of hypocrites. But you can't get into politics. Like, they don't have any logical argument. They simply think that any reform will hurt them politically, because what they did is they had all these pandemic-related protocols that helped them. Now that the pandemic is over and states want to ensure that there's more integrity, or because you know what, restrictions and integrity are both euphemisms being used as euphemisms now. They just want to. If the pandemic is no longer an issue in 2024, then why implement the same policies that were created in a very almost haphazard manner? They expanded voting only for the pandemic. It wasn't. A lot of these protocols weren't voted upon by the state legislatures. So you now have a state legislature that voted on, and they don't, and a lot of these protocols, all they do is, for example, like people who pick up the votes from drop boxes, they now work for the state, okay? Or not, like, they define work days as 9 to 5. And you have voter ID. What's wrong with voter ID? What's wrong with it? And by the way, does it make more sense not to ask for voter ID? Does it make more sense not to prove that you live in a location and just simply get a mail-in for everyone? Like, why is that so difficult to prove that you live in a location? If you need to vote by mail, do so, but just simply prove you live there. What is so difficult about that? So could there be some nefarious intent? And I wouldn't suggest that. My God almighty, I would never suggest that. H.A. Goodman would never suggest that. But Republicans used those loopholes back in the day to their advantage. That's why you had Slate and New York Times articles and other articles saying, yeah, you know what? Republicans are utilizing this type of voting technique for their own advantages. Okay, so Democrats, whatever suits them politically at that moment, they then, stomp their feet, scratch and claw, the outrage is heard forever. But President Trump is basically saying, look, here's the article. Weak CEOs are now denouncing Georgia's election law, but have they read it? And here, Koch facing blowback for resistance to Georgia voting law, and President Trump saying play the game in the same manner that they do. That's all he's saying. That's all he's saying. So Trump said, okay, so it's finally time for Republicans and conservatives to fight back. We have more people than they do by far. Don't go back to their products until they're relevant. We can play the game better than them. So that's what he's doing. It's Democrats who started this game, and it's Republicans now or Trump Republicans who are just starting to fight back. Democrats and activists on Twitter, and this is a consequence of the boiling cauldron of discontent called Twitter. There are no arguments. Like, they have to engage in hyperbole. Trump's not a despot. He's just a Republican you didn't like. He's not an authoritarian. Authoritarians and tyrants don't sign prison reform legislation or remove Americans from never-ending conflict, like President Trump tried to do and did in some respects. And he tried to do in a very grandiose way. On May 1st, 2021, we're supposed to leave a place we've been in for 20 years, a counterinsurgency conflict that President Trump ended. So that's a lot more important than any of his tweets. But again, Democrats have their policies are just, Democrats are the party of incremental change. So that's why, if they don't have every conceivable advantage, if they don't have every possible conceivable advantage, they don't stay afloat. If they don't have all of social media algorithms, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Trevor Noah, James Corden, who else? John Oliver, Saturday Night Live, MSNBC, CNN, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Vanity Fair, Esquire, Rolling Stone, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Time Magazine, Mother Jones, The Nation, intelligence operatives, Comey, Clapper, Brennan, Strzok, McCabe, all of the music industry, all of Twitter, all of Hollywood, every producer and director out there. If they don't have, and I'm probably, now we have CEOs, now we have baseball, we don't have Major League Baseball. If they don't have every possible advantage, you're left with incremental change from establishment, a leftward, just incremental change to the left compared to establishment Republicans. Boring. Most people don't care about that. What gets people going is Medicare for all, Green New Deal legislation. This is what universal basic income. This is what the left. This is like the most passionate voters in the Democratic Party want those things. Democrats will never implement them, ever. So they now then say, well, you said something, and so we're gonna make sure you starve and go homeless, and you're gonna be you're not gonna be able to work anymore because you said something that's in this society it's a reckoning. We're gonna reckon you. It's a reckoning. We just decided this now. It's like, yeah, well, you know what? Hillary Clinton and Bill and Joe Biden and everybody on the left, Jimmy Kimmel, who started. I mean, his jokes used to be. Would never have, with the Man Show, he performed in blackface also. So the left doesn't really, depending on how influential you are, you can get away with everything. So there's no vantage point. There's no way of actually being even-handed with this cancel culture type of phenomenon. Because what Democrats do, every once in a while, they'll eat their own. But depending on how big you are and influential you are on the left, you can get away with the most hypocrisy, the most duplicity, the most disingenuous behavior. And now President Trump is saying, look, if you're going to do that, if you're going to try to boycott, if you're going to try to get advertisers, they don't really address Tucker Carlson. Their rebuttals are pretty vapid. And what they do is they say, oh, well, you know what? He's linked to this euphemism. Well, no, he's not. He doesn't believe in anything bigoted. He has opinions you don't like, but those opinions you've then called, horrible prejudice opinions. not because they're inherently such, they're inherently those terms, because you have no actual rebuttal. Your sense of what Democrats do is their sensibilities now have become ingrained in morality, but the sensibilities of apoplectic, morally superior liberals don't equate to actual morality. What they feel or what they find offensive oftentimes is not really offensive. It's just an argument that they don't like. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Trump's fighting back. And that's not an example of cancel culture. People say, oh, well, look, he doesn't like cancel culture. No. That's just the game. You created this world, Democrats. Now, if CEOs want to lose 74 million, like half the almost half the electorate, almost half the electorate voted for Trump. And that's with 92% negative media coverage. So that kind of shows the country is even more conservative than people think. If you have every single conceivable advantage and media just every day trying to just tear down Trump and he still gets close to half of the electorate, what do you think the country is really like? Okay, it's not about supremacy. It's about logic and reason. Okay, nobody in their right mind appreciates or likes or admires or sides with bigoted or prejudiced people. Nobody. It's interesting because social media, they think that they're the ones who made, offensive or hate-filled thought process. They're the ones who made that unacceptable. It was always unacceptable. We didn't have to wait for this generation of Twitter, or this world, I should say, this era of Twitter activists to tell people that, bigoted mentality is wrong. We already knew that. Now the left is just utilizing their fabricated position as America's morality police just for political gain, which of course helps only the Democratic Party. Doesn't help the people that they claim to help. Give me your thoughts below.